Just let me tell you, from my standpoint, I had an overall sense of well-being, high energy, stamina, and performance. Brain fog lifted that I didn't even know I had. And then also we used to do IQ testing pre and post detox. And on average, we would see about 10 IQ points actually reclaimed. And that's an important mechanism because that can increase the detox effect by 3 times or 300 times. Or,
Wow.
Basically, it's 300 times normal levels, but you see a 3 times liberation of toxins. So it's an amazing effect that niacin induces that most people don't even know about.
Welcome to the Sweat Fanatic Podcast, where we talk all things sweating, infrared saunas, hot rock saunas, hot yoga. Today, I have a special guest that I've wanted to have on for a while. His name is Dan Root. He is an author, radio personality, health and detox coach. He wrote the book Sauna Detoxification using niacin, following the recommended protocol of Dr. David E. Root, who is his father. His website is getdetoxinated.com. He is highly respected and one of the leading experts in the world of detox and the go-to guy when it comes to detoxifying with saunas, especially with niacin. So let's get into it. So Dan, how's it going? Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me, Erik. Glad to be here.
Yeah, awesome. So I've had multiple people, recommend you and say, hey, you have to look into Dan Root and his father, Dr. Root, and get him to talk about saunas and detoxing. So I'm very excited that you accepted the invitation.
Well, like I said, glad to be here. And I'll tell you, after 43 years, I think I may know a few things.
That's good. Well, I'm excited to pick your brains. So let's start at the very beginning. We'll start with the background. So how in the world did you get into sauna detoxing?
Yeah, so my father, he was in occupational medicine before he retired, and he was looking for a way for detoxing chemicals because the medical community knows about chelation, but there's really nothing out there to detox the chemicals. And this includes the pesticides and the persistent organic pollutants and all kinds of different chemicals that people experience. But in occupational medicine, we were dealing with like the PCBs or the mercury and other types of toxic exposures from the workplace. So he was basically trying to detox these employees that were exposed to chemicals. But the interesting thing is that we were seeing that when we were using a sauna detox program using niacin, and we can go into how that works. The thing was, we were seeing chronic conditions actually being reversed too, and we were dealing with the acute toxicities. So that was a rather eye-opening experience. Now, I got involved in 1986 when I went through the program myself, and back then it was grueling. I mean, we went through 5 hours a day, and it was a 21-day on average. But yeah, 5 hours a day, and 4.5 of those were in the sauna. Now, that was the dry sauna era. So we have
that makes it even harder.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've since learned that the infrared saunas actually are far superior, and we can go into that as well. But just know that we've changed the program from that 5-hour day ordeal down to a 2-hour program. Even though it sounds like a lot, just know that there's about 20 to 30 minutes of low-impact aerobic exercise involved. And then we put you into a sauna for a total, now this is infrared, for a total of 75 minutes. And during that period of time, you're going to have a break. So there's going to be a 5 to 15 minute break between. But all in all, it's about 75 total minutes in an infrared sauna.
Nice. Growing up, did you want to get into your father's work, or did it just kind of happen organically?
Well, funny thing there is that I wasn't really interested in detox at all. And at the time I went through the program, I needed to. So I was basically going to become an employee of the company because I installed a computer system. They when they had me install it in 1985, you have to understand that people didn't know what computers were back then. So it was obvious I was going to have to go to work for the company and show them how to use it and implement it and all that. So as part of the terms of my employment, I had to go through the program. And I went through it kicking and screaming. I wanted nothing to do with this thing. And so I was pushed through, instead of 21 days, like I mentioned earlier, I was pushed through for a 33-day program. But it turns out that what they were trying to do is get me to a point where I hit this thing called end phenomena. And I talk about that a lot in my book and things like that. But just let me tell you, from my standpoint, I had an overall sense of well-being, high energy, stamina, and performance. Brain fog lifted that I didn't even know I had. And then also we used to do IQ testing pre and post detox. And on average, we would see about 10 IQ points actually reclaimed reclaimed as a good word for that, by the way. And then also my color vision, my sense of smell, and my sense of taste became more vivid. So if food was prepared properly, it tasted and smelled wonderful. And then on top of that, my dreams became more vivid and I remember them better. Now, this was 1986 that I did that, and I am now 62 years old. And I feel the same after all these years, and I never get sick anymore.
Dude, you look good. I would have never guessed your age. So that's a compliment to what you're doing and everything, the sauna detoxing and all that type of stuff. So I get the same thing sometimes. I'm 39 years old, so I was actually born in 1985.
Okay.
But a lot of people do think that I'm in my late 20s, which is a compliment to me. Genetics, but also I've been sweating every day of my life for 10 years. And my wife's the same way. And she has the same exact skin where it just flushes us out from head to toe, top to bottom. So let's get into your expertise. One of the biggest benefits of using a sauna is the detoxification. What are some common chemicals or poisons that your detox program helps reduce?
Pretty much anything that's stored in the body. So our livers have never adapted to being able to detox chemicals or man-made chemicals and certain heavy metals. In fact, one of the worst metals that can be inserted into the body is gadolinium from MRIs. I see a lot of people coming to me because they've been poisoned by their MRI. And so they come in and they go through the program. Actually, when I say they come in, they come to me because I only work remotely now with people. So I used to have a center, but the center shut down at the end of the COVID era. We were at the end of our lease and just didn't feel like it was worth renewing. But anyway, I do everything now remotely. And so when people do come to me, they have all kinds of issues, including mold, Lyme, and many different types of chemical exposures. I see a lot of mercury too because of the fillings. But the thing is that just about anything that the liver cannot break down and you can then detox naturally, our program is going to be able to properly detox. There's one caveat: we cannot prove the forever chemicals. So the PFASs that are, basically not binding to fat like most lipophilic toxicants, but they are going to bind more with proteins. We believe we are detoxing those. We know the mechanism that would work in our program to do that. We just haven't had a chance to do any kind of studies since when we were in the occupational medicine space, we weren't really seeing that chemical or those chemicals as something that we were going to detox. So we don't have any case studies, but we certainly believe that we are.
So when I started researching you and after I found out about you, and I came across gadolinium, and I have never heard of it before I started researching your detox program. From what I understand, it's what they put in us for MRIs, right?
That's the biggest reason why it would be in the body.
Okay. So that's the main reason. Is there any other ways that we can get that in the system?
If you're near a place that manufactures the gadolinium, maybe, but literally the only reason that metal is going to wind up in the body that we can really think of is through MRIs. I do know of a couple of people who were exposed to let's call it a military base that had some research going on, and they got exposed to gadolinium. But the thing is that for the most part, MRIs with contrast are going to be the main reason why. And in fact, I understand that some CT scans can have gadolinium, but it's not something I hear too much about. So.
Gotcha. So what are some, because I had never heard about this, and I'm a paramedic myself, and I haven't come across a patient that knew that they're having issues with gadolinium poisoning. But what are some of the signs and symptoms of gadolinium poisoning?
Great question, because these are pretty unique in some cases. Like the first three I'm about to mention, it's going to be deep bone pain, severe deep bone pain, electrical sensations, and brain zaps. Those are really important ones. But then you get like brain fog, cognitive dysfunction. But there's going to be also things like tinnitus, ringing in the ears.
Yeah.
There's like low body temperature, hair thinning, and there's going to be other things. But the worst condition is called nephrogenic systemic fibrosis, or NSF, where the skin feels like it's thickening, getting to be wooded. And that's a severe sign. Yeah, because that can also affect the organs. And in most severe cases, it can become a cause of death.
Oh, man, that sounds brutal. But yeah, I was really surprised when I looked into it, and I heard some really horror stories of how it's just wreaking havoc on people's life. And then, of course, I saw the success stories of people posting of going through your program and just raving about it. And it sounds like with your program, sometimes, how often does the first session work? Because they have to do the program a couple times, right, to get a lot of this chemicals and gadolinium out of their system?
Great question. Yep. In fact, we've had the chance to do 15 studies that are published. There's other studies that didn't make it to full publication, but we have found that through all the years, in fact, 36 years in occupational medicine, and I'm in the 43rd year now. But anyway, studies have always shown there's about a 1/3 body burden reduction on a 30-day program. So in most cases, people should plan to do this more than once. And if you've ever had gadolinium, even just one injection, I would certainly recommend you do it at least 3 times, possibly 4. So in the worst case that I've ever worked with, it was 32 gadolinium injections over the course of 8 years.
Holy cow.
Just to give you a brief rundown, this poor gal who's a nurse was essentially bedridden and disabled when I first learned of her.
I could imagine.
And and so her goal was to be able to dance again. And I started working with her, and after the 3rd round, she was able to function in society again. So she was no longer bedridden and disabled. And then on top of that, after 2 more rounds, so she went through 5 with me, she was able to dance again. And
That's
was
awesome.
really
I love hearing that.
Yeah, it was a wonderful case story. And then on top of that, she's done it at least another 3 times that I know of. And I asked her one day, I said, why did you continue if you're able to do the thing you were trying to do, dance, And she told me that she's obsessed with doing the program now because she just does not want to get into that same kind of space again where she was no longer able to function. But she's a great case study.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, as a firefighter, we always talk about fire prevention is the best way to reduce the tragedy of having your home burned down. So if prevention with our body as well. So one of the cool things I see with your program on the pictures you'll show pictures of the towels and the different colors of people's sweat and the toxins and chemicals that are coming out of them. And I can relate to this because the first time I used a sauna after fighting a fire, and I was surprised that the towel was starting to turn brown in certain spots as we wiped the sweat off our body. It was a very eye-opening experience. And for the other firemen as well, is with gadolinium, is there a certain color to it that comes out, or is it kind of like invisible? You can't see it on the towel.
So firstly, not all chemicals or metals are going to have a color. So it turns out gadolinium is silver. And in fact, if you have a white towel, you're probably not going to see it. This person I mentioned, though, that did have 32 gadolinium injections, she was smart enough to actually put a black jersey on for a period of time in the sauna. And she showed pictures of pre-sauna and post-sauna. And that black jersey turned silver from the gadolinium coming out of her body, we have to presume. But the other thing, too, with the towels, in fact, one of them you've probably seen is the blue stain on a towel that had a swatch cut out. And that was a first responder from the cleanup efforts of Ground Zero. And so he was basically, or they were all exposed actually to a lot of these different chemicals and heavy metals, really. From whenever they would move debris, there'd be a new cloud that would pick up, and they would be breathing that in or absorbing it through their skin. And what that bluish material turned out to be was manganese, morbidly high levels of manganese, because manganese is good for the body, but not when it's coming out blue like that.
Right.
And we know that manganese is used when they manufacture steel. So there was a lot of manganese in the debris field there. But that was one of the biggest things. And interestingly, too, these first responders and volunteers of the cleanup efforts came down with what's known as the World Trade Center cough. And that became a chronic condition. And that was one of the many chronic conditions that we did see reversed with this program. And at the time, I don't even think we knew that the lungs were going to be detoxed as well with this program. But apparently so. And we have a wonderful case story of a woman that I can use her name, Anne-Marie Principe. And she literally walked into the cloud as it was rolling down the streets of Manhattan after one of the buildings fell. So her lungs shut down to the point where there's one lung completely shut down, and the other one may have had 30% functionality, but only 20%, we believe. Anyway, she did learn about the program. She came in, and although they turned her away originally because they were afraid that she wasn't going to make it just because her doctor had already told her to go home and take care of her affairs because she was going to die.
Wow, that's scary.
She made it. Yeah, she made it to the center, and although they did initially turn her away, she did run into my father while he was still there, because he was flying back and forth between New York and Sacramento when he was still living here. And so the thing was that he took her under his wing. That's the kind of guy he is. And he stayed with her for 55 days while she went through a 55-day program. And she wound up becoming one of the best lobbyists, I guess you could call it, because she was able to raise more funds than anybody to help put over 5,000 of these volunteers and first responders through the program for free. So that was a very exciting program. But her story, by the way, is something that you can find podcasts with us talking about it and things. But
Awesome.
anyway, the other thing about firefighters too is that most firefighters could never commit to a 30-day program like this at 2 hours a day, where they have to time niacin correctly. We haven't even gotten into how this works. But the thing is, you have to time the niacin and dose it correctly. And there's just no way an active duty firefighter could ever do this program. So we've come up with a different method that utilizes the sauna, but it also takes advantage of the niacin flush. And so it's called the niacin flush sauna detox, of all things.
Yeah.
The thing is that it is very user-friendly, if you will. It's not a commitment, and it's something that you can do whenever you want to get into a sauna. If you just want to take some niacin and get the flush happening, you would start low and slow. But just know that this is a method that does help to detox, but it's nowhere near as powerful as ours, as our full program.
Awesome. It sounds good. Yeah, it's tough. All the people the first responders, the firefighters, the police officers, just the people out and about, just helping out. They were just exposed to nasty chemicals, and it's really good. I've heard really good things about the detox program after 9/11. Any first responders. So I guess now is a good time to get into the program and how it works. So you just want to give us a short rundown on how it works?
Certainly, yes. In fact, there's a lot of what's called pharmacokinetics behind this, a lot of science. And in fact, I have a PhD level overview of the program. It's like 29 pages that explains exactly how this program works. But the thing is that the main point to consider is that niacin has the capacity to induce two separate effects in the body. Most people have heard of the niacin flush, where the skin turns red because of vasodilation, where the capillaries are opened. That redness is actually red blood cells, and the capillaries have opened up to allow more red blood cells to flow out to the skin regions. And the skin is where the toxins are going to want to come out through sweat, obviously, in a sauna. Now, the niacin flush was basically the main reason why people thought the niacin was needed, but there was actually this secondary effect. And the secondary effect we call rebound lipolysis. That's what it's actually called in the studies themselves. But it's where niacin actually has this ability to inhibit the body's ability to produce the energy, TP energy, adenosine triphosphate energy. So in the mitochondria of the cells, that's where we produce this energy. The niacin actually has this effect of basically destabilizing it for about 2.5 hours. And that's an important thing to know, because there's this effect that's an overshoot after niacin wears off, where the body's ability to produce this energy is shot up about 4 times normal levels. And during this period of time, you see a lot of lipid mobilization, and that's the triglycerides being broken down into their main components of glycerol and fatty acids and all that. But what's going on is that when you get this increased lipid mobilization, you get toxins released from fat. And that's an important mechanism, because that can increase the detox effect by 3 times or 300 times. Or,
wow.
Basically, it's 300 times normal levels, but you see a 3 times liberation of toxins. So it's an amazing effect that niacin induces that most people don't even know about. But the problem is that if you don't time the niacin correctly, you're not going to get the effects that we need to do the program. So detoxination is the name of our program. In fact, it's a concatenation of detoxification and decontamination. So that's where that,
I love
that
the word
came from. Thank you. In fact, I'm a detoxinician, and I train others to become detoxinicians. But the thing is, with the program, when you know how to dose and time niacin, then we get the effect where we're able to time the sauna around this rebound lipolysis. So it's a very, very powerful program, but what made it even more powerful was adding binders. So the original program we used in occupational medicine for 36 years never used like zeolite or bentonite clay or activated charcoal or things like that. So once we added those, not only did we improve the efficacy of the program, but the user experience. Because I can tell you, when I went through it in 1986, after a 5-hour a day ordeal each day for me, 33 days, no binders, you're going to have headache, nausea, flu-like symptoms, malaise, vomiting, diarrhea, and all these other detox symptoms. And today, by the way, we've also learned to mitigate a lot of that by gut health. Gut health is now extremely important, and you won't even find it in the current edition of the book. It's very new. We've really started to embrace gut health, and so that's another component that's going to help efficacy and user experience. But anyway, back to the program. The other thing that makes this so effective is the difference between dry saunas and infrared. So let's just touch on that. Now, Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt is the reason we switched from dry saunas to infrared, and especially far infrared. So the reason is because he did an internal study where he had a group of people use a dry sauna for 1 hour, and then a group of people use an infrared sauna for 1 hour, and he tested their sweat. And what he found was that the sweat from the dry sauna was about 95 to 97% water. And I've seen studies that show 99% water, and the remainder was salts. But when he did the test of the sweat from infrared sauna users, he found that the sweat was 80 to 85% water, and it was the remainder was what we call sebaceous sweat. I'm going to come back to that, but that sebaceous sweat had mostly the heavy metals and man-made chemicals, but also sulfuric acid, uric acid. There was, salts and other ammonia, things like that. But it was the main mechanism that was getting these toxins out of the body. Now, let's talk about sebaceous sweat, because that's another important feature. So we call it sebaceous sweat. If you look that term up, you won't find it. But it's basically the mixture of your eccrine watery sweat and the sebum that gets melted in the sauna. Now, what's sebum? Sebum is the oily material that the sebaceous oil glands produce. And your sebaceous oil glands are pretty much attached to every hair follicle in the skin. And they keep the hair follicle lubricated and the skin and hair moist, providing a protective barrier against bacteria, but not against chemtrails, which are real.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, the sebum melts in the infrared sauna more efficiently at lower temperatures that people can tolerate better. And it's that oily-based material that gets these what are called lipophilic toxicants, or fat-attracted, fat-soluble toxins, out of the body. And that's because our livers, we've never adapted to being able to detox these man-made chemicals or heavy metals. So what happens is they essentially get sequestered in fat or adipose tissues in order to protect the body. This is what a lot of people consider it as. Personally, I just think they're lipophilic. They're going to seek out, fatty environments. But anyway, they wind up actually causing a lot of different distress to the body. Oxidative stress is one of them. There's mitochondrial dysfunction is a huge concern. And then there's, all kinds of like cellular damage because these toxins are passing through the cells. But we do see all kinds of issues from toxins that, a lot of people, especially doctors, believe that the liver is basically dealing with them. And if it can't, so it rejects those back into the small intestine so you can poop them out, right? Yeah. No, these things are so lipophilic that most man-made chemicals and heavy metals are going to get reabsorbed into the tissues, and they're not going to come out, and they're just going to wreak more havoc in the body. So one of the biggest things with the binders is now we use binders like zeolite in a major way, like 5 doses per day, because those bile acids are in the small intestine and they're circulating those toxins from the liver that the liver rejects back into the small intestine. So if you have zeolite, for example, you're going to filter those bile acids, and that's going to improve both the efficacy and user experience. And also, speaking of gadolinium, zeolite is the strongest binder for gadolinium. So anybody who's ever had an MRI with gadolinium, you want to go ahead and get on zeolite right away. Without the program even, it'll start to detox the body, and it's a very important first step.
So I got a good question about, because I've heard of binders being in the sauna world for a while and stuff like that. So can you just give me a quick description of a binder? And niacin is not a binder, correct? That's a...
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, niacin is vitamin B3, and it is something that has to be the flushing form of niacin, and also it has to be the immediate release. So it cannot be like a slow or sustained release or extended release. Those will not work. In fact, interesting story about how they make these timed release products is many times they coat them in phthalates, which, if you know anything about toxins, like the plastic water balls, they have BPAs and phthalates, which makes the bottle squeezy. That's actually what they use to make these things like slow release niacin or sustained release. Anyway, so it has to be immediate release niacin, but it is not a binder. And what it does is it triggers those two responses, the flush and rebound lipolysis. And by the way, the niacin flush sauna detox for firefighters is only working with the flush, doesn't trigger rebound, doesn't liberate toxins. It just deals with what's in the blood.
Okay.
But binders, on the other hand, are going to pick up things that are, in the case of like zeolite, it's able to pick up things that are positively charged. It's able to pull these things into their cages, which is a process called adsorption. And then there's also an ion exchange where there's going to be good things like calcium, magnesium, sodium, zinc, chloride, all kinds of different things in the zeolite that the zeolite will do an ion exchange where it's going to pick up higher atomic weighted materials like mercury, for example, or gadolinium. But it's going to basically pick those up, and in the same moment, it's releasing the good minerals that are lower atomic weighted into the system. So actually, when they've done studies on cattle, what they have found is that when they feed zeolite with the food for the cattle, that the study group always had a higher nutrient density than the control group. So that was another interesting thing to note. But the way the zeolite is going to work is both in the GI tract, and if you get the kinds that we recommend, like the zeolite pure from Zeo Health, it's going to be able to go systemic as well. So it's going to act somewhat like a chelator in the blood, because I like to separate the two. Binders are in the GI tract, chelators are in the blood, but there's actually a mechanism of action that's important to keep in mind. So consider it a binder in the blood, but basically chelating the heavy metals and chemicals in the blood. So that's another good thing. We don't want them to go into the cells, by the way. We don't want the zeolites to get into cells. We want to, basically keep things from getting into the cells. So they're like another line of defense.
So the niacin you're taking, and you're getting the flush while you're in the sauna, and you're timing it right. Do you have to time the binders as well?
So you're describing what amounts to the niacin flush sauna detox, and let's make that distinction, because when you look at rebound lipolysis, that's like 3 times normal levels of toxins, or 300 times improvement over detox than the niacin flush sauna detox version, which is only capable of dealing with what's already in blood. So what you just described there is basically taking niacin, getting into a sauna while flushing, which I definitely recommend. I mean, you can do that as many times a week as you want. But when you're on a structured program like detoxination, you definitely have to do everything precisely. So the niacin flush sauna detox, which you described, essentially is waiting for the flush to come on, getting into the sauna. And you do have up to 30 minutes from the time the flush subsides to getting into the sauna to get the effect. So if you forgot to preheat your sauna, for example, you can always do that and then get in. But the binders don't need to be necessarily timed the way the niacin does. The binders are something that the only thing I warn people against is taking binders anywhere near any kind of medication. So most medications, by the way, have some kind of, they're basically petrochemical based.
Yeah.
They're going to have some kind of materials that our program is going to affect, and so maybe reduces the effect of the medication, or can cause withdrawals in the severe case of any kind of psych medications. But the binders actually are best, like zeolite is best to take 30 minutes after a fatty meal. And that's because that's when the bile acids are going to be more actively trying to break down the oils and fats from the food that you've eaten. So they're going to be bringing those toxins back from the liver that it couldn't break down. So that's the best time to actually take a dose of zeolite. But when you're on a full detoxination program, you're going to be doing 5 doses per day, and you're going to have 1 dose ready for you in the middle of the night in case you wake up with some headache or nausea. And that usually is in the first 7 to 10 days, because that's the most active period of detox. So just to give you an idea.
So how much more, I'm just putting this in my head. So how much, because I've been using the sauna for a long time. Just the reason why I use the sauna is just because I feel a lot better after using it. That's my whole passion, is I feel like $1,000,000 every time I get a deep sweat and use a sauna or do hot yoga. I'm just learning into your program, and I'm learning it into binders and niacin stuff right now. How much more effective is using a sauna when you combine it with using binders and niacin? And I think you said it earlier, but I just want to reiterate.
Well, Yeah, just so you know too, because I've been using a sauna since I was 10 years old. We started off with dry saunas. We lived in Europe for 6 years, traveled around, saw how important saunas were.
Yep.
And so I've had a sauna in my life since I was 10 years old. And like I said, I turned 62 this year. So I do sauna daily myself. I get 30 minutes in, unless it's a weekend here in Sacramento where I'm going to be working out in my yard and, I'm going to get a good sweat out there anyway. But I do sauna every day in the morning, right before I have to do anything. It's part of my routine. And it's how I do stay healthy. I don't even have a primary care practitioner that I can think of now that my father's retired. So I don't want to have to go to that machine. So I avoid it like the plague. But the sauna is something that with binders, you do get a better effect because we know that there's a lot of benefits for sauna. I mean, I know you've had guests on and you've had all kinds of discussions about all the wonderful benefits of sauna. But the thing is that the detox is, of course, my main focus. Yep. And so binders with sauna are going to be very helpful because considering the fact that cardiovascular improvement is something, we see an increase in cardiovascular activity when somebody's in a sauna. Well, that's also going to be mobilizing toxins. So it's a good idea to have zeolite. And timing of it can be either before or after. Zeolite, for example, will stay in the GI tract for at least 8 hours. So it's perfectly okay to do it before or after. In fact, it doesn't care anything about nutrients. So if you were to take a niacin dose, you don't even have to worry about the zeolite affecting it.
Okay.
Again, medications, we have to be careful.
Yeah, I remember the first time I took niacin, I didn't know anything about it. I just heard it's good for like energy or something like that. And so I order a bottle off of Amazon, or I can't remember where I bought it. And I get it. And I was leaving my shift at the firehouse and I'm like, oh yeah, niacin. That's right. They said it's good with energy. And I took it. And sure enough, I don't know what, 30, 40 minutes later, I'm in the kitchen at the firehouse and another fireman goes, Erik, your face is completely red. You look like you're having a full-blown allergic reaction. What's going on? And all of a sudden I look at myself in the mirror and I just see my whole body's red. I feel itchy, tingling, and I'm like, oh, no, what's going on? And I'm like, dude, I might have to go to the hospital. And then they're like, hey, do you want us to take you to the hospital? And then I think back, what did I do? I didn't use any new shampoo, no new soap. Wait, I took that niacin. And then I start Googling it and I find out about the flush, which I was like, so thankful that it was a normal reaction that I was having to it. But I imagine you have to coach a lot of your clients through that process.
Yeah, in fact, I'm so glad you're bringing this up because, frankly, I think that there's this conspiracy out there to try to warn people off of niacin because if you go to the stores locally, about the only thing you're going to find is 500 milligrams of flushing niacin. They never put it out there as 100 milligrams or less. It's always 500. And if somebody who's never done niacin before takes a 500 milligram dose, you're going to be on the floor writhing in pain, your stomach totally knotted up. I know because it happened to me when I first started working with the powdered form, and I forgot to check the decimal point on the gram scale. So I was expecting a 50 milligram dose, and I gave myself 500 out of the gate. So I've been there, done that. But the thing is that if somebody's new to niacin, I would tell them, get 100 milligram capsules, and then the first dose, split one of those capsules. Whichever side has the most in it, that's the one you take. And then if you feel like it works fine for you, it doesn't give you any kind of negative response, then you can do 100 milligram doses. But like I said, the first dose for most people should not be a full-on 100 milligrams. But it is body mass dependent, and so is how we dose it on the protocol. That's another important fact, is that the body mass matters. And the effects that we're going for with rebound lipolysis, for most people, especially women who tend to be of less body mass, the goal is to up titrate to 500 milligrams. And that's where we can be sure that most women are going to trigger, and men who weigh less than 200 pounds. So when you get up above 200 pounds, or I should just point out that for men, we typically have to look at 10 milligrams per kilogram. So you take 2.205 actual weight and then multiply that value by the 10 milligrams, and that's what your dose is going to be. So the thing is that from 500 to whatever that 10 milligrams per kilogram is, basically it's somewhere in that range is when your body's going to start triggering. We don't know exactly when, but we just know that there are 3 studies that show this in humans that we found so far. We were working off of a study that was done in 1966 on sheep for many years. In fact, for 36 years, we were expecting that the sheep study was valid in humans. Turns out that when you look at the sheep study, it shows that the rebound occurs within about 40 to 50 minutes of ingesting niacin, which is after somebody's done their exercise on the original program. So the rebound lasts for a total of 5 hours, and that made sense for why a program would take 5 hours a day. Well, It turns out that sheep and humans do not metabolize niacin the same, and it takes us 2.5 hours to trigger rebound. And so that was a shocking revelation we didn't even learn until 2014, which was the aha moment where we realized, hey, instead of wasting the first 3 hours of everybody's day, why don't we just make it a 2-hour program?
Thanks for listening to the Sweat Fanatic Podcast. Stay tuned for part 2.